our webinar today is organized by the Center for Humanitarian Action, a Berlin-based think tank in Germany, CALP network, and co-hosted by Ground Truth Solutions. So very much welcome to everyone who's joining from wherever you are in the world. Probably from the registrations we saw, we have a bunch of people from across the world, and we have also a bunch of people across the world on our speakers and panelists today. So what are we going to talk about today? We have we are welcome and seeing a lot or notice a lot of feedback and commitment and interest of people to talk about digital accountability in cash and voucher assistance. We are looking today at how practitioners and professionals are implementing accountability in cash and voucher assistance, and particularly in a digital environment. And we'll be learning a bit of a background of why we came to this topic and why we think it's important. We'll be linking it up to humanitarian standards, which are already in place. And then most importantly, we'll do a reality check and see how all these different standards and experiences are also reflected in the field. So we have three great panelists and speakers from Ground Truth Solutions, from Ukraine and from Nigeria. And we will be sharing additional background from CALP and Center for Humanitarian Action, also called CHAR. But before letting you know what we'll be talking about more in detail, we have a few housekeeping rules. Please keep in mind that this event is being recorded. We will be releasing the recording on our CHAR website and YouTube's channel in the aftermath of this webinar. We have the Q&A button in the Zoom section below. So you can raise throughout the webinar, you can raise your questions up there. You can rank other people's and colleagues' questions. When you rate up the question accordingly, we will get back to them during our Q&A session later in the webinar. And then thirdly, if you have any technical issues, please don't mind, and please reach out to our colleagues at the CHAR technical support team. They will be helping and happy to assist you with any kind of issues. Then last but not least, the webinar is in English. We do have in Zoom the live transcription function. So if you need, and if you're interested in using the live transcript, please click on the CC live transcription below. We're in the process, and we are very much aware that probably other colleagues would have been interested in additional languages. We are trying to understand how we can use different language functions for upcoming webinars and events like this one. So what are we going to talk about today? And before introducing myself and all the other panelists, a quick run through what we'll be discussing and what you can expect today. So of course, this is a warm welcome to everyone who is interested in joining us and discussing and talking about digital accountability. We'll be introducing all the different speakers who are around the virtual table today. Then we'll have a bit of theoretical background, let me call it this way. We'll be talking about a paper which was recently released by the Center for Humanitarian Action on digital participation and digital accountability, and the potential of, or untapped potential of, using digital technology in humanitarian action. We will have CALP, who will be introducing, as a member of the task team, the latest and recently updated data responsibility guidance, which is linked to accountability, in the sense that accountability is one of the core principles in the guidance. And we'll be talking a bit about what data responsibility is all about and how it is actually linked to accountability, or accountability to affected populations, and digital accountability in general. Then the core theme of our discussion today, which will be based on these two more theoretical backgrounds and introductions, we will be having a reality check discussion with our colleagues from Ground Truth Solutions, Right to Protection from Ukraine, and Jiredu Foundation in Nigeria. So they will share their experience and their very valuable insights on how accountability, digital accountability, is actually experienced in practice. This is all followed by a Q&A session where we will raise and try to answer all the questions in the live session, if not possible during the webinar, because then we probably run out of time. We will try to keep and follow up on your questions in the aftermath of the webinar. And then we will wrap it all up and hopefully continue talking and discussing about digital accountability. But before actually, well, giving you a bit more idea of who is around the table and who are the experts talking about the topic today, we would also like to learn from you. So when you think of digital accountability, what actually comes to your mind? And we want to hear what you think is behind this term, how you practice and operationalize it, and what you think about it. So please either use the QR code on the screen or the Menti hyperlink in the chat to share your experience and perceptions. We will be presenting the results in a few more minutes, but so you have a couple of minutes to think about it. And please don't be biased about the answers, which will be you will be hearing about in a few minutes. So try to use the poll right now, because we don't want to bias your answers. So here we are. So who's around the table? We have, they will all introduce themselves in a second. So just quickly, we have Hannah Miles from Ground Truth Solutions. We have Rory Crew from CALP Network. We have Serhi Smil from Right to Protection in Ukraine. Manu Samuel Seth in Nigeria from the Giroudou Foundation. Myself, my name is Andrea Düchting. I'm from the Center for Humanitarian Action in Berlin. Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself? I've already mentioned your name, but maybe you can let us know what you bring to the table and to the discussion, and what comes to your mind when you think of digital accountability.
Thank you, Andrea. So my name's Hannah Miles. I am a research manager at Ground Truth Solutions, and I manage our Cash Barometer project. So the Cash Barometer, which many of you may already know, is an accountability initiative, an independent initiative which looks at cash and voucher assistance recipients in Nigeria, Somalia, and the Central African Republic, and collects their feedback on the aid they receive, and hopes to give them more of a role in decision-making in humanitarian action. What comes to my mind when I think about digital accountability, and maybe to start us off with a bit of a criticism, or maybe a bit more of a controversial point, I immediately think of tools looking for problems, and I think maybe to add a bit to the question, what I would like to think about when I hear digital accountability is placing power back into affected people's hands through these digital tools, in ways that helps them reach humanitarians, monitor humanitarian activities, access information, and things like this.
Thanks, Hannah. Super interesting, and I'm sure we will hear more about it when we start talking about the realities on the ground and in the field. Rory, what comes to your mind, and what do you bring to the table when talking about digital accountability?
Thanks, Andrea. So yeah, my name is Rory Crew. I'm with the CALP Network, a CVA research and learning platform and membership organization. And I'm a technical advisor focusing on data and digitalization. So in theory, should know a little bit about the topic we're discussing today. I previously run and implemented and designed social protection and CVA programs around the world. I think when I think about digital accountability, I really, especially lately, think about it from a people-centered design approach, that I think in often the cases we've tried to do it in a sort of post hoc way, so putting in these tools and processes for accountability after the fact, after all the decisions have been made, essentially. But using a people-centered design approach, we can actually put the accountability mechanisms right from the start by including people in the design of the programs, which we're then going to implement. Thank you. Thanks, Rory.
Super, yeah, the CVA perspective, the cash and voucher perspective, super interesting. So maybe for those who are just dialing in and who have just recently joined our discussion, we are at the moment introducing all the different colleagues and webinar panelists, and we will be soon kicking off with an introduction and a scene setting exercise of a paper which was recently launched by the Center for Humanitarian Action, followed by an introduction of the updated standards, humanitarian standards about data responsibility, followed by a panel discussion and reality check with two very experienced colleagues from Ukraine and Nigeria. And with this, I would ask Serhi to please introduce himself and let us know what you bring to the table, and from your perspective, what comes to your mind when you think of digital accountability.
Hello, everybody. My name is Serhii Shmihal. I represent an organization called Right to Protection, Ukraine. So we are one of the biggest organization in Ukraine who provides different type of activity and support for people who had to like move from their initial place of living to other places inside of the country and abroad. And yeah, so we work with different humanitarian partners and providing people with like cash assistance and any other types of assistance. So for me, digital accountability is more about empowering users to have control over their digital experience. So it goes with like transparency and having their influence on the data that they have shared with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Serhii. Well, yeah, I think we'll hear a lot about digital experience when we hear about your insights or learn from your insights in Ukraine during our reality check and panel discussion. Seth, turning to you now, why do you think you are here? What do you bring to the table, and what comes to your mind when you think of digital accountability? Over to you.
Thank you, Andre. My name is Manuel Samuel Seth. I am the Meal Manager for Jaredo Foundation, a non-governmental organization implemented in Nigeria. And it's an organization that is very keen on accountability. And in whatever we do, we put accountability, especially to the affected population, in the center of our interventions. And when I think digital accountability, first thing I think computers, I think devices and the likes, and then I think automation. And after that, I also think about how responsible we are to the people we serve in the digital system. And what I think is how efficient do we make systems in trying to be accountable to the affected population? How efficient do we make them? How effective do we make them? How many of the gaps, how many of the challenges are we able to remove? And even though we have created, because I see digital accountability, because I see when you digitize a thing, it creates kind of a little bit more gap for me between the people we serve and the people providing service. So even though we provide, we create a wider gap, how close are we still with the people that we serve? And that's what actually comes to my mind when we think digital accountability. So I want to see how we are maintaining that accountability, even if we are not there in person. Thank you very much, Andre.
Thanks a lot, Seth. So, well, that's difficult to respond to as the last person to quickly introduce myself. So my name is, as I already mentioned early on, my name is Andrea Düchting. I'm working as a non-resident fellow at the Center for Humanitarian Action, and I have the pleasure, with an operational background, to now being able to zoom into a topic which is close to my heart, which refers to accountability and accountability in a digital environment. So I can only echo what all the colleagues have already said. To me, digital accountability is finding a way of how best we can be accountable towards the people affected by crisis in a digital environment, and also build agency for them to themselves take decisions and power over their own data. But I don't want to bore you too much about my own perspective. Maybe I can refer to what we have learned when at the Center for Humanitarian Action, when we conducted a small study, and recently released a paper on how digital technology is actually used in order to increase participation in the humanitarian sector or to strengthen accountability to affected population. I will share a few selected insights from that paper in a second. Just for you to know, I've conducted more than 20 interviews with practitioners, mainly from the international level, due to various constraints, it was not possible to get people's perspectives directly and upfront. But the findings are based on a literature review and what colleagues shared with me while I was conducting the interviews. Nevertheless, the colleagues on the panel here right now, they also asked me to give a more theoretical kind of definition of what digital accountability is actually all about. And the definition which I have found most useful when I was writing the paper was actually looking at the different layers of accountability. It's not so much different to the overall accountability discussion, but it's an accountability discussion in the digital environment. So to say, you have the legal compliance perspectives, I think, which we all know about, which mainly refers to different data protection regimes, like the European General Data Protection regulations, GDPR. So most of the organizations need to be compliant with international, national data protection regimes and have to struggle with it accordingly. Then we have the technical accountability, which mainly refers to technical standards, industry standards for the different data systems and the platforms we are setting up. So we have to spy on myself since I'm not an IT professional. We have the ISO standards, we have the NIST standards. So ISO stands for International Organizations for Standards, and then NIST is, for instance, an US National Institute of Standards and Technology. So we have all the technical accountability aspects for auditing systems, for example, as well. But then we have the third pillar, which we will be mainly talking about today, is the social aspect of accountability, so which all refers to what most of us said during the introduction, which is putting people at the center of the system, and when using digital tools, meaning looking at digital literacy, linking it to concepts like accountability to affected populations, community engagement and accountability, but mainly understanding how people actually use the tool, use the tools, how they can take organizations or hold organizations to account and take themselves, take account for what is being done, how the data is being used, how the data is being processed, if the data is being deleted, retained, and so on and so forth. So the whole aspect, I think, which we'll be learning about when we talk about data responsibility as well, but more from a people-centric perspective. So when we're linking this to the research which we have done at the Center for Humanitarian Action, while I've selected a couple of findings which are very much close and linked to the discussion which we'll be having during our reality check today. So most of the interviews I've spoken to and with, they said, yes, digital tools, and particularly in this sense, digital communication tools, are a viable tool to strengthen accountability and also participation, offline, online participation, whatever you can think of. However, the way we use the tools are currently not necessarily up to its potential, in the sense of, what does it mean? We mainly use the tools in the sector for one-way information sharing. So it's not really a two-way communication with people of understanding their needs, their complaints, their concerns, their questions, their feedback in general. So if we use social media, instant messaging tools, and so on and so forth, is mainly to share information about the programs. But we will probably later understand if even this one is sufficient already of sharing, if we are sharing the right information and enough and sufficient adequate information. Then if those tools are being used, they're usually used for just one program or an isolated project. So they are not necessarily used for learning across the organization, learning across the sector, or embedding it in a longer term process for digitally transforming the way you work, meaning you're using the tools in order to improve the way you work or increase accountability and transparency. So tools are being used, but for different purposes, not necessarily for accountability purposes, to be more transparent towards people. Then another challenge which we came across was that, well, when we think of all the different tools which we are all using on a daily basis, the WhatsApp, the Telegrams, the Signals, the name them all, usually organizations, humanitarian organizations, cannot use them for compliance reasons because most of the tools are not necessarily compliant with the data protection regimes. So we are putting the risks over the actual benefits, and then we come up with new tools which people are not familiar with, which people probably have never seen of, and which are probably only used for one specific program or one specific organization. So is it really a benefit for the people to having organizational individual tools instead of using those which they are already familiar with? Question mark, maybe something we can raise during our reality check later on. Then last but not least, as I already mentioned, so the tools can be used for strengthening and contributing to accountability needs, but at the same time, they also reveal important gaps. Gaps in the sense of when we think of the offline, our offline processes, I mean, do we really question the way we work and how we actually share information and communicate with people, or do we just copy paste them to an online environment? So important gaps in the sense of what is the role of digital literacy? Do we really capacitate people to understand which tools, technical tools are being used and how they are used, how data is being used and processed? So we can use it as an opportunity when we introduce tools and do our various assessments to actually understand what are the gaps in our processes as well from a people perspective. So far, what came out of the study was that it seems that we are, instead of questioning the power relationships and imbalances, as Hannah also mentioned earlier on, we are rather copy-pasting them to an online environment. So we are not really taking digital transformation as an opportunity to really question the way we work and the way we try to strengthen accountability to affected populations. And with this, I leave it here, and I'm looking forward to a thought-provoking discussion and learning more about the updated IASC guidance on data responsibility, which came out recently. And with this, I hand over to Rory.
Great, thank you very much. So you should be able to see my screen now. If fantastic, great. So I'm going to speak briefly about data responsibility and digital accountability. And I think this was really interesting for me to actually just sit down for a moment and go back to the sort of basics of this and the sort of sources of what really are the linkages here. And so data responsibility is defined as the safe, ethical, and effective management of personal and non-personal data for a humanitarian response. And when it comes to what that actually means in practice and how do we judge what is safe, ethical, and effective as well. And this is really where we can go back to basics on this, looking at the humanitarian principles there, so humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence as well. And these are things that actually then give us the framework to judge from some of our quite technical, perhaps data responsibility challenges on, which is really important because I think, we're not dealing this in, we're not dealing with, marketing, information here, we're dealing with, real world humanitarian responses here, which are, complex, context specific and ever changing as well. So really, always having in mind those baseline humanitarian principles are really helpful and important as well. And then if we want a little more detail as well, I've always found it really useful to dive into the core humanitarian standards on quality and accountability as well. And this really fleshes out for me, okay, the linkages then between the data responsibility and the digital accountability as well. But as Andrea has flagged, it's not the only document we can refer to as well. So you will probably have been aware of the data responsibility in humanitarian action guidance. So this was released in 2021 initially, and this year, so in April, late April, It's just been released, so there's a revision process which CALP were part of, and then lots of other organizations were part of as well. And this really is my sort of source and go-to document. Every time I'm thinking about introducing a new tool into a program I was running, or anytime anyone approaches me and wants advice or guidance on a new tool or system they're implementing, and particularly around digital accountability, this is the first place that I send them as well. And this one has been endorsed by the Interagency Standing Committee. So de facto, all our organizations really have signed up to this and committed to this document as well. And then just a quick QR code there as well, which you can also get from the slides afterwards as well, if you want to take a look through the document. As I said, the aim of my presentation here really is to flag to you either, tell you this document exists, or to remind you and that it's been updated as well. And so it really should be, bookmarked on your browser, so something you can go back to time and time again as well. It is a long document, which I think gives lots of great detail as well. It's split into various sections. So the first one is a really good overview section, which explains who the document is designed for, a bit of background and context, and then scope of the document, what's included, and importantly, what's not included or might be included in other places, such as the core humanitarian standards. And then, as Andrea has flagged, it's got a series of principles in it as well, which are things that allow us to make the judgments. And it perhaps won't be a surprise to anyone that principle number one there is accountability as well. So first and foremost, accountability within the data systems and for data responsibility. It's got a series of recommended actions as well, split between the system-wide, the cluster sector and organizational level. So who should be doing what within a data responsibility and digital accountability lens. Then it's got a series of tools. So it's got a monitoring, evaluation and learning diagnostic tools. So SEF, perhaps as your as the meal focal point for Jirudu, that would be the first place that you would start in this document. It's got sections on terms and definitions, which I always find endlessly useful when I'm trying to put together presentations or documents. Are we using the same common language, the same terms and definitions for things? Then it's got examples of data responsibility in practice, which we'll come on to more in a moment. And then a series of templates as well. And these are to allow you to look at it, to dive in and say, okay, I need to do a data privacy impact assessment or similar, or a diagnostic. And it gives you all the tools and templates to do that, and then some guidance on how to complete it as well. So it's a very practical document. It starts with the high level, and then it really goes down into the detail of, okay, how do you actually implement some of these things? And as I was putting this together, I was thinking about the more the linkages as well, and how there's potentially two perspectives which each of us might have on this as well. So there's a data responsibility and accountability perspective of every time we implement a new system, whatever it's for, if it's for registration for operation or for finance or accountability, we need to be responsible and accountable for our organization's data management activities as well. So it's being responsible for what we're doing with people's data. But also, it's an opportunity. We can use data and digital tools for accountability channels as well, which we'll hear more from Seth and Sehi and Hannah on later as well. So there's two particular perspectives there, as long as, of course, we're doing that responsibly. The document also highlights some challenges and opportunities as well. I think particularly from our perspective within CVA programs as well, we are collecting more and more data. We're linking that data up. We're having to share that data with FSPs to make the payments, and sometimes governments and other coordination mechanisms as well. So this really increases the complexity of the humanitarian space that we're operating in as well. As ever, the policies are playing catch up to implementation. Anyone who's even remotely explored AI will be aware that the guidance and legislation and policies are, way behind what the tools we're actually using as well. And as we've heard already, that there is sometimes a lack of capacity and digital literacy, as much in the organizations as perhaps with the recipients that we're supporting as well. The good thing is we are talking about it. We're in this meeting today. There is a demand from the donors. There's donors on this call today. And obviously money talks as well. So if the donors are asking for something, that gives us that challenges us and our management to actually implement that as well. And as this guidance really highlights, this isn't something that we should be doing alone. A lot of the decisions around data responsibility and digital accountability, we shouldn't be doing as individual organizations. We should be trying to do as a collective to avoid, as Andrea said, this sort of more project-based approach to things, that we spin up processes and tools and things that only exist for the lifetime of the project as well. We need to break out of that cycle there. And something I think this set of guidance is really useful for, and it's done really well, is there's a set of, I think there's now 15 examples, and you can submit more to the team who created the document, of real life use cases or real life challenges and solutions of data responsibility and digital accountability. And about half of these examples are related to digital accountability as well. So when you're looking through this document, you can open this annex and say, if you've been asked to share data with the government, you can go in and there'll be mini case studies here of people who've been asked to share data with governments and how they've approached it as well. So really, and we're going to speak more about this, we're trying to plug the gap between the sort of high-minded guidance perhaps, and then, okay, you're trying to implement a program in a challenging place wherever you are. How do we plug that gap between the guidance and then the realities of actually, supporting people and doing it quickly, but also safely and effectively as well. So that was a brief scan through of the IASC guidance as well. And you'll receive the PowerPoints. You can either find it on Google, or there's the QR code there as well. So now we're going to briefly look at the poll results, which have just been shared as well. So this is what the people said at the start of the call when they asked the question, what is the first thing you think of when it comes to digital accountability as well? And so the largest one we see, the largest three there, which really stand out to me, are responsibility, which is fantastic, that is there as well. And I think looking at the perspectives, it's using the data responsibly as well, but also using tools and data responsibly to provide the accountability mechanisms as well. Transparency, I love that as well. And it really makes me think of actually including people from the start of the program as well. Right at the design stage is where accountability should begin. It's not something that is done once all the decisions have been taken. Putting accountability right at the start it should be fundamental to every program. And then of course feedback as well, constant iterations, receiving feedback from the populations we're supporting and serving. And that's where work like Ground Truth Solutions Cash Barometer is really vital and actually really helping us understand what the recipients are working with as well. Yep, so I think that's a fantastic set of results there. So we've gone through that quite quickly because we wanted to really give the meat of the session to get a chance to hear from the participants of Seth, Serhi and Hannah as well. So we've got about 30 minutes now where we're going to be hearing from the participants there of their realities of implementing digital accountability tools in their various contexts as well. Also bear in mind there's the Q&A functionality as well. So make sure you're opening that up at various points, putting in your questions for the panelists. And then after we've done with our reality check session, we'll be going through those and posing those questions to the panelists as well. So it's really a chance for you to then direct questions at them and do some learning for your own programs as well. Fantastic. So we've already had introductions by the panelists. So I would like to kick off with an initial question, which I'm going to aim at Seth from Jiridu in Nigeria here. So in the communities you work in, Seth, in Northeast Nigeria, what opportunities do you see when it comes to digital accountability tools? And what tools have you trialed and how did it go?
Thank you very much, Rory. And so basically in Northeast Nigeria, I would say people are actually eager. People want to explore these innovations. They want to see how digitization works. And if we're able to implement a digital accountability system, I think the people are willing to give it a try. We have tried digitizing a system for accountability previously on the Nigeria Joint Response when we did an accountability piloting, and we had a complaints and feedback mechanism that was digitized. So we had this booths where you had like phone booths where people would go in and they would actually, there's a recorder right there where they just click it and speak into the recorder and have their whatever feedback they want to give. And then at the end of the day, it's uploaded into a server, it's pulled out, transcribed and interpreted, and then feedback is given. And that pilot actually went well. For one, the number of persons that actually came in to give either complaints or feedback increased greatly. It could be because people were curious and they wanted, hey, I want to use that recorder, I want to use the digital device, I want to press it, I want to see how it functions, I want to see how the feedback comes and everything. And so people are always excited when they see new things and they want to actually explore these things and see how it goes. And so when opportunities for this come in, people want to actually be part of it. But then the challenge is when you want to do such systems in a large scale, then you begin to look at the people's whether they're able to afford the gadgets that will help them to connect with the accountability system, especially when it is digitized. So you might be talking about devices or phones and tablets that they might use. And unfortunately, when you come to Northeast Nigeria, not everybody has access to these kind of things. And in some locations, it's a major challenge having even communication network. So once you go in, it's like a twilight zone where you don't get to make calls, you don't receive anything from there. And that's how it is. So imagine deploying a digital system to a community like that. Basically, it will be a huge waste of resources and a huge waste of time for that kind of location. But when you have places where we have people that have access to these devices and there's good networks, then it's actually easier to have people, because people are actually excited. People want these systems to work, because I see in the issue of accountability, people they really want to be heard. They really want to feel part of the system. They want to see that they are contributing to whatever is happening. And so whatever modality will make that possible, people are willing to embrace it and love it. And so basically for us, we explore more of the one-on-one physical communication with the people, because they will usually prefer it, because they feel we are talking with you and you're listening and you're hearing us and we get feedback faster and better. And so if these systems are going to be in place and it is going to give people that same feeling of participation and consultation, then it will always be a welcome development. My only fear is that if the system comes in and then it just becomes something that is there and people just keep on pushing things upwards and it's a one-way communication and it never comes back, then that is where the challenge comes in. But I know that for areas where people can have access to these tools and platforms like this, it's a very welcome development. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. That was really inspiring. I think not just the fact that that was a new channel that I've certainly never heard of as well, a new feedback method of recording in telephone boxes, but also that you found that people are really eager to engage in these mechanisms and want to feel heard and really be able to give the people feeling of participation as well. I hope everyone else has come away from the answer as inspired as I have as well. So thank you, Seth. So now moving on to Serhi with in the Ukraine. So Right to Protection has provided MPCA, so cash assistance, to over 1 million people. So the people that you serve and support, what do they expect when it comes to accountability and the services you provide? And what have been the main challenges to then providing that accountability to them?
Thank you, Rory. So, yeah, I want to describe the processes that we have inside of the country. As many of you knows that we have a war full-scale invasion from our neighbor, and a lot of people was displaced, and different humanitarian organizations are trying to help and provide cash assistance included. Yeah, so generally, I would like just to make a step back and describe the general digital literacy in the country, while that's really important when we're talking about everything digital. And as far as I see from my own perspective, that it goes along with the European level of literacy, I would say. So that's a lot of people like young really get what is digital is, and they use any kind of gadgets, and it goes pretty smooth. But when we're talking about vulnerable population, which we assist, that's more or less people in age, and yeah, that's senior people. And very often we are facing the problem that they just simply have no gadgets at all. And also when we're talking about the internet coverage, so unoccupied territories, when we are talking about rural areas, we have this problem where just there is no internet at all. This situation was pretty during the last years was improved, really great. So in these terms, I would just stress on the system that we have and that our state government was introduced. The instrument that was created by one of the Ministry of Digital Transformation is called DIA, and where all the documents is collected and all the state services is put it in one place. So very interesting that the DIA was providing assistance, and everybody was allowed and is allowed to apply through this mechanism, yeah, through the system, apply for the assistance, and with the different register systems, the data could be matched, and the right people could just get their assistance directly. Especially humanitarian organizations have they have opportunity to collect all the beneficiaries which match to their own criterias or values, let's say it like this. So when we're getting back to our organization, the biggest problem that we face, that maybe that's something that Seth already told, that people would like to still believe and trust to the face-to-face communication, and that's the thing that we cannot overcome. And we still provide this face-to-face communication, screening, enrollment, and providing them with the assistance. So generally, when we are talking about our own system, where we have full-scale projects, full cycle projects, sorry. So in this case, we provide our beneficiaries with different possibilities to requests, for example, for the data deactivation inside of the system. We are providing them with different mechanism of communication, like one-way communication or two ways. For example, like providing them with SMS once they selected to be assisted, or we are providing them with the possibility to join the messengers challenge, where they have get all of the news. We're providing them with QR codes, so the people can just type it and leave a feedback, where we collect it and introduce inside of our system. So yeah, generally it's really important topic, especially when we're talking about in these frames, once we are going to the vulnerable people. And the last I would say that I hope that I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Serhi. Yeah, that was fantastic. And it really sort of brought home to me, and it really made me think of Ground Truth Solutions cash barometer work, actually, of which I'm a huge fan, and I'm always shouting about as well. And the sort of feedback that I remember from their work about how people like to interact with these accountability mechanisms as well. So then to Hannah, so what does then, in your words, Ground Truth Solution data show about the problems that people face with the aid and receiving aid, and how might digital tools alleviate these issues?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for also saying that you're a fan of the cash barometer. Yeah, I mean, the title of this webinar asks, how can we get the basics right? And I think when we speak to people as part of the cash barometer and more broadly across the countries we work in, there are certain basics that we're failing to meet time and time again. So in Nigeria, for example, when we speak to CVA recipients, we had 94% of people say that they know how to make a complaint, but not even a quarter of people actually say that they've ever done it. And I think that's where, means like Seth described are also really, really interesting, different ways that we can get people to engage. Other common problems that come up, people don't know how long their CVA is going to last. They don't know when their last transfer is coming, which makes it really hard to plan. They don't know how humanitarian organizations are making targeting decisions, which causes all sorts of community tensions and confusions and makes people feel like aid is arbitrary. And this is nothing new. These results come up in our surveys year after year. And I think part of that, which has also already been mentioned also by Serhi, is this consistent lack of transparency, which I think really needs addressing. To take another example, in Ukraine, we find that people say, there's an abundance of information, but people still don't quite know, how this registration process is going to work, or what aid is available, or, the eligibility criteria, or what's my registration status. So we also find, especially amongst older people, there's a difficulty for them in verifying the information. Older people in our surveys often said they were concerned about fraud when using digital tools to register, or phishing scams and things like this. So, people will, I think this represents all of the problems that are looking for a solution, to kind of come back to what I said at the beginning. So I think, when it comes to accountability as well, in solving those issues and in getting their concerns heard, like Seth and Serhi both already said, people often do say they prefer face-to-face communication with humanitarians. And I think, you know, we can all understand that. We've all had issues before where we've thought, I just want to talk to a human. I want somebody standing in front of me that can deal with this. But I think from an operational perspective, we all know that's largely unrealistic. To have so many people in the field that are able to listen to all of these issues face to face. So I think an interesting way to address this concern might be to ask, why is it that people feel that they want to speak to someone face to face? Is it about trust? Is it that they, you know, people call a hotline and they don't get a response, so they think, well, I need to have somebody in front of me, otherwise they're not going to respond? Is a part of it digital literacy, which we already spoke about? Is it an issue of transparency, that people feel like they just have no idea what's going on or what the systems are, and so, you know, again, we fall back to, I should speak to a person. And so I think in this case that I'm a bit torn. I mean, there are two issues. There's you know, digital tools that could be really useful in helping us overcome these basic issues, but at the same time, I think these tools are not going to be successful unless we overcome these issues of transparency and trust in order for them to work. So it's a bit of a chicken before the egg scenario, and that I think we kind of need to address both at the same time. But I think in if we can have digital tools that allow us to make a system where people get aid on time, receive roughly what they expect, and that they know how long they're going to get it for, and they know, okay, if something's wrong, how do I ask a question? How do I complain? Then that would be great. And I think sometimes we think digital tools and we think these overly flashy and fancy approaches to AAP, but it would be nice if they just simply helped us overcome these basic issues.
Thank you, Hannah. It's always shocking to me to hear that you know, so many recipients don't understand or don't have the information of the basic components of the program that is supporting them. You know, when the next transfer is coming, when the final transfer is going to be, how much it's going to be, or, you know, perhaps how to, you know, fully use their accountability mechanisms open to them as well, particularly then when, you know, people are speaking about adding blockchain or AI to a program or something, and the recipients don't understand, you know, don't have the information, the most basic tenets of the program as well. And like I said, just doing the basics right is somewhere that we should really be starting. And the fact your research is constantly highlighting this, but we're still having these other discussions as well, I think in some respects is a failure, or could be seen as a failure of a digital accountability channel, because this information is being presented to us, and yet we're still not resolving it, and you know, still focusing on other things. So I'd like to unpack that a bit more with Seth, if I could. Seth, in your introduction, you mentioned that sometimes these digital accountability tools place themselves between people and the organizations that are supporting them as well. And as Hannah has highlighted, often it comes up that people prefer face-to-face interactions as well. So Seth, is there a sort of common ground, or how can you implement digital tools that don't force themselves in between the recipients and the organizations, but perhaps complement that relationship?
Thank you very much, Rory. Before I talk about that, let me just touch a little bit of what Anna just said previously. So you would understand that when we talk about digital accountability, the challenge is not in the digitalization of the system. The challenge is in the accountability. Now, you find out that when you, like I said earlier, when I hear digital accountability, I think of automation, I think of making things more effective, making things more efficient. And so when you automate a very functional system, it becomes more effective. When you automate a dysfunctional system, it becomes effectively dysfunctional. And so it just implies that when we don't fix our accountability systems that are manually operated, and then we move them into the digital space, all we have done is to digitize the problems. We have digitized a bunch of irresponsive accountability systems. And so at the end of the day, we have more effective things that are not working. And it doesn't help in any way. So for me, I think that the key thing here is actually to fix the systems. How effective are our accountability systems? When we fix them, then we talk about digitalization. So when you digitalize the systems, then you know that these are solutions that are already working and people have accepted, and you're making them just more effective. Now, like I said, when we talk about digitalization, I feel it puts a kind of a gap between the people we serve and the organizations. And normally we are humans, we always want to put a face behind what we are doing. I want to be able to say, hey, Anna, you said you were going to tackle this issue some times back and you didn't do it. And so I couldn't go back to an AI or a system and say, hey, you were the one, it's your voice. And people want to put a face behind the thing. And for me, I think that it's very, very important that in moving into the digital space, the people we serve need to be carried along. They need to understand how it's going to work. They need to give their voice to how they think the system should be. And they should be able to have options as well. Okay, should I not be interested in this? How do I reach you? So people should be able to have these options. They should have these things in play. And so, and a lot of times, Rory, we have this, like you just shared the guidelines and everything. And I was actually wowed. I was just looking at it and I was like, oh, this is very interesting. But you find a lot of organizations having this awesome guidelines and everything, and it ends on the paper. And then when you go to the ground, nothing is happening. And so if we really want these things to happen, we need to find a way of translating these awesome ideas, these awesome systems of policies and pages of books and making them realities on the ground. And the only way we can do that is if we bring people that we serve together and we do it in such a consultative way that we believe that we agree with people and they're able to bring in their quota to whatever we are doing, such that these systems are more effective, so that these systems actually address the gaps that we are trying to address, and we are not just compounding issues upon issues. Thank you, Rory.
Fantastic, thank you, sir. So many quotable moments there. I think the next report I write is just going to be full of Seth quotes. I think to steer the conversation now slightly towards the sort of data responsibility angle as well. Sehi, you mentioned about the registration platforms which are in use in Ukraine and which your organization work with. So in your experience, what concerns do people have about what happens with their data?
That's a good question, to be honest. They providing us with all the data they have. They provide us with the documents for making photocopies of it. And in this case, they do understand that once they came, they had face-to-face connect. They left their documents. More or less at that moment, they feel really on a safe ground. But once it goes like the data processing takes too long, our hotline becomes really hot and everybody is just asking when they get their money. And at that moment, at that point, they really hesitating once they're like what they've done was a good way or not. So first of all, the biggest hesitation that they have, that's the data that they've shared with us is in the right hands. Another case that we've found a lot, unfortunately, even in our country during the war, we found a lot of like frauds and like a lot of situations when people just fishing in and trying to get and obtain the money that people get as assistance, and they just like pretending that they represent our organizations, and yeah, they just frauding and getting the money of the people, of beneficiaries. Well, we are trying to do our best. We are even in our news on the page, you can even see that we are announcing that we are collecting data and we are looking for beneficiaries. We are trying to assist you. And at that moment, one poster after, or even in the same news, we are announcing that we are not asking about any PIN codes, any additional card details or bank details. Even in such cases, we still have a lot of problems when people just calling us and asking that a representative of our organization was asking for additional data. So yeah, the biggest thing, and my point is that once it goes to the money, once people have any kind of communication which relates to money, it brings a lot of hesitations. But generally, once they can have feeling that they are heard, or they can have ability to communicate, it goes nothing. I mean, people feel safe, and everything, all the hesitations is just eliminated.
Thank you, Serhi. It's really interesting to me that we're hearing the same themes sort of mentioned over and over again. It's, you know, the basics of transparency, you know, knowing about the program, as you said, giving people information about what's happening with their data and why it's being collected as well. But then also something less tangible, I suppose, you mentioned, and Seth mentioned this as well, of people feeling like they can participate and actually affect change in the programs as well. So rather than it's not just the technical side, it's about making the people, you know, feel and understand involved, and that they, you know, the feedback they're providing will actually, you know, change things as well. And I know from reading Ground Truth's work as well that they'd also found similar information in Ukraine that people were concerned about providing data, and it, in some cases, I think, had prevented people applying for some of the programs as they weren't sure what they could trust as well. And that's something, you know, we see in other contexts as well. So to round this off, there's a sort of closing question I'd like to pose to all three of the panelists here. So if people on the call are about to start a program, about to start designing a program, or they're thinking about how they might change some of their digital accountability mechanisms, what is the one thing that you think they should bear in mind before rolling out a new digital accountability tool, or perhaps refreshing whatever their digital accountability tool is? So let's go with Serhi, Seth, and then Hannah with that one. So over to you, Serhi. So what's the one thing people should keep in mind when rolling out a digital accountability tool?
That's a good point and good question. So maybe Hannah or Seth can answer and just get back in a second.
I don't mind jumping in while Serhi deals with that. And I think my answer, you know, relates a little bit to what Serhi was just talking about, you know, when people feel like these digital tools give them that power, they're so much more comfortable using it because they're no longer this kind of this passive recipient, but they're actively able to find the information they need themselves. So I would say, you know, the one thing that people should bear in mind when rolling out an accountability tool is, was this designed together with affected people? And And does it help? Is it designed with the aim of solving some of these problems? Let's not put the cart before the horse and say, you know, I have this great tool, where's the problem it can solve, but rather start from the other end. And, you know, does it have this principle that technology, like anything else that we do, should be increasing people's agency and not reducing it? And I think that's really particularly important in contexts where we have really deep-seated power imbalances and inequalities. We really need to be careful to make sure that we're not thrusting a tool onto people and calling that accountability. So yeah, I think that is a challenge that I think I would also pose to aid actors, to development actors, and also to the private sector. Let's not consider aid and digital equity and access and all of these things as very separate, but how can we advance them as a whole, side by side?
So my point is, yeah, I'm totally agree with Hannah. And the first thing that I would mention is that we need to ask the people we are trying to assist. So what is their perspective and how do they would like to have this done? And the second, or like the thing that I would mention also, that's before designing this tool, that's very important just to realize how this would work, not for just like me, but also for beneficiaries. So this two-way communication is really important. While that provides this kind of transparency and trust from the beneficiary side, and at the same moment, it provides us with the possibility to like, for just a simple example, like even when the data was collected in incorrect way, we can just simply correct it. So that's like two-way communication, and that's something that I would mention as the first thing. Thank you.
And I would say that before you actually think about putting a system in place like this, we need to, the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what do the people that we serve want? What do they want? It's not about what we want, but what they want. And so when we ask that question, what do they want? Then we look at the system itself, how effective it is, how functional, how well has it been going? And so that we ensure that whatever we are upgrading or digitalizing is better than what we have on ground. And the idea, the guiding principle for humanitarians, the fact that we do no harm. So we have to be careful that whatever we are doing does not cause more harm than good. As Anna had said earlier, for example, you go to a location where you have people that do not have access to phones to access the internet, and only a few persons do. Then if you roll out a digital system in that kind of a place, it's very possible that you're putting power in the hands of a few persons, and because people will now have to go to them to be able to have access to these digital systems and platforms. And so maybe the already existing power imbalances, you're worsening the situation, and so at the end of the day, you're doing more harm than good. So we need to check these things, and then we should be sure as organizations that we are not going digital as a way of escaping our responsibilities. We're not trying to run away from the things that we're supposed to face, the hard truths we're supposed to deal with. And so you have a system that just filters, oh, important information passed, no, not important, don't pass, this, and you don't actually have to do the interactions. So we should be sure that the reason, the purpose of why we are putting this is actually for the best of the people that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. It does feel like we're in a sort of watershed moment in the humanitarian sector here as well. I mean, all three of the panelists here have mentioned sort of in their first sentences. So Hannah mentioned, so was it designed together, the system? Serhi mentioned about asking the people, and Seth said what do they want as well. So within the first sentences, we sort of everyone had mentioned looking at this from a people-centered approach as well, which always sort now we're talking about it in this common within language. It feels sort of obvious, but it's something that I think has taken certainly me a long time to really embed in my thinking as well. So yeah, fantastic that each panelist is really highlighting that perspective as well. And I like that Hannah challenged us to think and do better around that as well. So now you've heard enough of my questions as well. So now I'm going to dive into the Q&A. And this is your chance to pose questions to the panelists as well. So people have been asking questions and then have been voting on them as well. So, and the top voted one is something that we haven't really touched on in this session, although was touched on in the planning session we have. So I think Sehi, I'd like to bring you in on this as well. So how do we balance data legislation? So whether that be in the country or perhaps the global or more sort of global legislation, and the contextual realities of working with local organizations as well?
Yeah, that's the pretty tough one, especially in the frame when that's different actors are assistant beneficiaries. The case of Ukraine describes or presents that there are a lot of organizations which raise some funding, came to Ukraine and assisting citizens here, and they just simply need simple bench of data, especially one unique identifier, like for example in our case in Ukraine, that's like tax ID. So the beneficiaries could be deduplicated in case the person or the household has already had assistance, got assistance. Yeah, so I know a lot of cases when just international organization collects data via phone or just registration via simple COBO form or Google Forms, etc. And when it gets to the national organization, we are working not under the, as you said, worldwide legislation or European legislation like GDPR or etc. We are working under our legislation, and that's a pretty tricky case, we need to follow the Ukrainian, for example, tax legislation. It said that we need to have all of the documents in place. We need to have the application form signed by the beneficiary. And in this case, that's simple thing that we need to keep in mind and consider while we are starting this type of projects, programs, and we need to work with this. So generally, when we are talking about digital instruments, we also need to have the system safe and close for external penetration of other kinds of frauds and so on. And at the same moment, we need to go along with legislation, with international legislation, and the audit of our partners at the end of the money distribution. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sehi. This is a question to let's do Seth and then Sehi. And this has come up a few times in slightly different ways in the Q&A here. Is so often when complaints and feedback is collected, it goes into the humanitarian, what the questioner has responded, the black box, and then they don't have visibility on the issue they raised or how it's being processed, and what is being done about it as well. So what can they do? What can people do to open up their systems so that project participants have direct visibility of the issues they've raised. And so they can see if nothing is being done, and then pathways to escalate the issues as well. So it's about issues tracking and transparency, and then understanding the ultimate impact. So Seth and then Sehi, please.
Okay, thank you very much. That question, it made me smile because I remembered we had a workshop with Hannah, and we were discussing something in one of the locations where they had this complaint box, and people put in a lot of complaints into the box, but the organization wasn't even coming to take the complaints out. And to pass a message, they set the box on fire and they burnt it up. So the people really got to know, oh, they were trying to say something. Now, yes, it's quite unfortunate that organizations tend to pull these complaints into the black box, as the person asking the question said. And so the thing is, imagine us digitalizing a system like that complaint box that was set on fire. It only means that all we have achieved is moving the papers into a server so that nobody gets to burn them. And so they can be there safe, away from the people that might want to burn them. We have not done anything to actually address those complaints. And it's important, it's not about having digitalizing systems, it's about we addressing complaints as they come in. So I think the first thing that we have to do is to sit down with the people that we serve, consultatively, to decide, to agree. When complaints come in, what is the turnaround time? How soon should these complaints be resolved? If they are not resolved, when should feedback be given? And I was reading a very interesting read from GTS the other day, trying to remind us about the connect between accountability and protection. Like they go in hand. It's accountability is protection, because if you're not accountable, it's a protection issue. There's no transparency, there's distrust, there's doubt. And so if we don't understand this and put systems in place such that we're able to check these things in our organizations to ensure that there's good turnaround time for complaints. When people bring in complaints, there's someone that is held responsible for responding to these complaints. While the process is going on, there should be communication from the organization to the people we serve to tell them this is the process that's currently ongoing. This is why you haven't heard from us. You hear from us over this period. If the complaint is resolved, the people should also get that feedback. If it is not, they should get the feedback and why it's like that. And so these are things that we should put in place to ensure accountability systems are working. Now, when we put these things in place, then we talk about digitalizing the system. But if these things are not functioning, then digitalizing, like I said, will just be us automating our challenges and our problems. Thank you, Ruby.
Thanks, Seth. Sehi, over to you.
So we try to implement this system, like to collect in any kinds of complaints and suggestions how we can improve our work. The best thing that I've ever seen, from my personal opinion, that's the system when you cooperate with the United States, any kinds of state bodies, when you like have online form on the website, you're trying to reach them, they provide you with a unique identifier, and there is a chain of communication that you have on place. That's possibly to build. We haven't done it in our organization yet. And what we already use, that's 3 ways of communication. First, that's a simple hotline. We're talking about this. The biggest issue that I would say that with the hotline, it is like when the person calls you, they can provide you with the phone number that you can reach once you have this issue fixed, or it could just simply be anonymous. So we need to consider this possibility for people to have this compliance still become or leave anonymous. Also, we have the second system. It's everybody can be mailing us, and the mailing system is one of the more useful, while you have the address and you can answer it once the issue is fixed. And the last one that we always need to keep in mind, that not all of the people have gadgets and have access to the internet, or just have no good enough level of literacy to like send emails or fill in the form. That's why we always, on each of our stationary offices, we have like simple box where it's with a seal, and everybody can just fill in the like usual form, paper form, and leave it there. So yeah, definitely, just to sum up, we need to focus on the collecting data, and the easiest way is just collect it in electronic way, but we also always need to consider that that's a tiny number of people which we still need to provide with just hardware, simple way of leaving their feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Serhi. And I see you didn't mention burning the complaints box as well. So I think, you know, we're all moving in the right direction there. This multi-channel approach is fascinating to me. So Hannah, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about what Ground Truth has found about people's preferences for digital accountability mechanisms, and making sure we're not leaving people behind, particularly those that are face-to-face. And then as a sort of slight addendum to this question, because we need to slide AI into every webinar that we're doing these days, what were your thoughts on what use AI might have within digital accountability mechanisms? So it's about multi-channel and then the use of AI.
Thanks, Rory. I think the multi-channel aspect is really important, because I think it would be so easy to just squash all dreams of digital accountability by saying, oh, well, it's going to leave some people behind. And, you know, that is a huge issue that we need to address. But and there needs to be multiple systems in place to make sure that everybody is reached 100%. But I think we can't expect one system to do it all. And I think that's putting too high a bar on systems of digital accountability. So they can be useful for some and potentially inaccessible to others, but that's why it's key to make sure that we have many different ways that people can interact and have their voices heard. And, you know, linked to that, I thought there was an interesting comment in the chat from Fernanda Baumhart, who was talking about in Ukraine there being these kind of inefficiencies in communication around people who then aren't selected for aid in the end. And this is something that we also found in our data, and it kind of makes me think about this issue of this black box, and how are people supposed to give informed consent about how their data is used, or how are they supposed to know who owns or stores or shares their data and with whom. Who's responsible when things like that go wrong? When you have, for example, people who we spoke to said, you know, my name's obviously in this system because I applied for this aid and my name is stored here, and I was told I didn't meet the eligibility criteria, or I wasn't selected, or for whatever reason, but my name is still there and it's blocking me from applying for anything else. So obviously a measure to try and stop duplication, but who is then responsible for that? So I think, you know, there are obvious concerns that people have. And I think, yeah, for that reason, there needs to be a multitude of ways that people can get in touch. On the AI side of things, I mean, to start, I really do think that artificial intelligence was the worst naming that we have ever done for a thing in history, because I think the main benefit that it can bring us here is not in being an intelligence. It's doing the boring jobs that we're still getting wrong. It could be used really well to inform people and to, you know, send out information snippets that people need, or you know, work for these jobs that don't necessarily need a person on the other end checking. You know, for the more complicated tasks or for sensitive complaints, then you know, I don't see much use of AI there. But the question, yeah, then comes, is there accountability behind it? Are people able to hold someone responsible maybe when things go wrong, when information is incorrect? So yeah, certainly there are risks there that need to be taken into account. But I think for, yeah, like I say, for these boring tasks, and when the risks are properly thought about and we can react to them in advance, then I think there are certainly avenues there that we maybe haven't discovered fully.
Thank you, Hannah. So perhaps we're talking about artificial disintelligence or unintelligence, maybe. We're coming to the end of the session, so I wanted to actually pose a question to Andrea, and then I'll hand over to her for the closing as well. So one of the questions is related to when there's multiple actors in a country working and they've got multiple accountability channels, how can that work? And then thinking of this of a lens of locally led response or localization versus a sort of standardization, either at a sort of national or perhaps international level as well. So could you just speak a bit about the sort of balance and challenges that poses?
Thanks, very challenging one to respond to shortly. Well, when we approach the session, I think probably that's another question which we could discuss throughout the whole new follow-up session. But I mean, I can briefly refer to what respondents were saying to the study which we conducted, which I referred to at the beginning of this session and the webinar. I mean, well, to be totally frank and upfront, what interviewees were saying that as much as they would love to see interagency platforms and multi-actors channels, they hardly believe it's ever possible, because unless there's an independent kind of provider, organization, however you want to call it, because you always have the different interests and conflicts of interest in place. There's also amongst organizations, and no matter whether international, national, or regional ones, you have an issue of trust and transparency, which again refers to the power imbalances, which we have already spoken about. And I personally, I mean, that's my personal opinion, as I wasn't discussed as part of the paper, but and asked other colleagues to respond to. I think when you look at standardization versus localization, why don't we have standards? Yes, they are important, because you need to follow a certain type of standards with different type of actors involved in an ecosystem. But at the same time, why don't, in many cases, well, segregation of duties are important, but who has access to the data? Who is being in touch with the people in order, who needs to have access to the data in order to be responsive to the people, address complaints, and so on and so forth? And how do we define those segregation of duties of those people who are allowed to access the data on people, and I'm mainly referring on personal sensitive data, with regard to those who have the accountability on the ground? I remember a local organization recently during our conference saying, well, international organizations are accountable to donors, while local organizations are accountable to the people. But how are you accountable to, can you accountable to the people when you don't have access to a certain type of information, when there is no transparency and trust between the different type of stakeholders working together? And I know that the compliance issue comes into place again, because you have certain rules and regulations which you need to abide to. But then on the other hand, as we have all spoken about, it's also a question about accountability and putting the people at the center. So I guess this balance is one of the most challenging aspects, which we need to look into. And I mean, just echoing while listening to the reality check discussion, first of all, personally, I'm very grateful that you reflected what the paper was also stating, and that many of the points were, I heard them again, and I listened to them again. So for me, I did do a bit of a scribbling. So we have to put the people at the center. That's what I heard from all of the different speakers. It's a question of access to gadgets and networks. When we talk about digital accountability, it's about options to diverse and different communication channels, offline as well as online. It's a matter of transparency to create trust, because trust is one of the key aspects to be responsible as well, to fix the system, but also to be accountable, to be held accountable, and to take account. So we have to address complaints, and there is also a need for information and knowledge to be able to actually take account. So meaning capacitating people to actually understand what it is all about, as Sehi was also referring to. And I think one of the most outstanding quotes throughout the webinar today, I think, Seth, you have been praised across offline, online, in the chat and in the Q&A session as well. I think it's about fixing the system to avoid replicating offline issues, or as you mentioned it, automating our offline problems in an online environment. I think this is one of, for me, again, one of the key takeaways of the discussion today. And I know we have already hit the half an hour mark or quarter hour mark wherever you are based and sitting. And I really appreciate you having joined our discussion today. Thanks for your commitment. And if you have a second, we would be super grateful if you could respond to our short evaluation, because we are also kind of bound to data and evaluations. Everyone else, we are gratefully, because the webinar and the whole project has been gratefully funded by the Federal Foreign Office in Germany. And of course, they would be interested also in supporting additional aspects and future type of activities. So please share your feedback. I think in the chat and in the questions, we also have a lot of prompting ideas potentially for future follow-up webinars. It looks like there is a huge interest and a commitment to drive the discussion forward and fix the system, first of all in an offline environment, analog environment, to then avoid replicating dysfunctional systems in a dysfunctional online community and environment. With this, my last word is to say thank you. Thank you, first of all, to all the panelists and the speakers and all the information, insights, experience which you shared from your international global surveys on the cash barometer. Thanks to Hannah from Ground Truth Solution. Thanks to Serhii for sharing his experience in Ukraine. To Seth, as far as I learned, our new philosopher amongst us for future quotes, and other colleagues who would love to be in touch with different colleagues and worldwide and in country. And last but not least, Rory from CALP for facilitating and sharing also the insights of the updated data responsibility guidance. And last but not least, I would also like to thank my colleagues in the background and the scene. Maybe you can briefly switch on your cameras to know who has been supporting us technically. And a big applause to all the participants and audience who stayed with us 3 minutes later than expected. Very warm and thanks, welcome, and thank you to everyone. Have a good day, evening, whatever, where you are based, and be in touch. We're more than happy to continue having this type of discussion and understanding how we can put people at the center and upfront when taking decisions about how we are using offline and online tools. Thank you, everyone.